It has been a while since my last video. I've unfortunately been very busy, but after a few months of trying, His Lordship and myself finally managed to set up what was for both of us a much anticipated Zoom interview to discuss the history of PvP with a focus on the clan world. So first, a quick introduction. His Lordship is the founder of the Wilderness Guardians PvP clan, which has existed since 2003 and is still alive today. You might also know him as the voice of the unauthorized biography video about the wilderness, which is a video that back in 2012 drew Jagex's attention to the problems that the PvP community was struggling with. Altogether, he's a well-known figure in the PvP community for his place in the clan world and for his efforts to focus Jagex's attention on the state of PvP, including in old school RuneScape, by the way. This video is a part 1 because it turns out that His Lordship, as you will see, had a lot of interesting things to say. In fact, despite the length of this video, we were able to cover only the period 2001 until 2008, so let's do something fun. Let me know in the comments what you would like me to ask His Lordship in part 2, and then I may include your question. Furthermore, I'll pick one comment, and that person will win a free copy of my trilogy ebook about the history and development of RuneScape, which also includes an entire chapter about PvP history. Okay, so let's get to the Zoom interview now. So hi Gene, thank you for wanting to do this interview with me to talk about the history of PvP.
It's a huge pleasure to be here.
So I was just explaining to Gene off camera, but we decided to record it instead now that although I know a lot about RuneScape history, PvP is one of my weaker areas. So even though you are watching this on a RuneScape history channel, keep in mind that Gene is actually the real expert here, and I know the backgrounds and I don't know exactly the ins and outs. I know the Jagex side of the story for the most part, but he knows the RuneScape side of the story, and also of course the Jagex part, because he was involved in some projects as well. I think I could say. So we will talk about it later. So first, I wanted to talk about the Wilderness Guardians, which is the clan that you founded in 2003. So before I'm going to let you tell you about how that came to be, why you decided to create a clan, can you maybe give us a little explanation of what the PvP landscape looked like back then in 2003?
So by 2003, when I joined the PvP landscape, I was already quite late to the game. The whole situation had been changing drastically, with the addition of the wilderness the year before I even started playing the game. And the fact that even prior to RuneScape, there was Cyber Wars, which was heavy on PvP as well. Never played it, but from what I hear, it was very heavily focused on those kinds of interactions. So by the time I joined in mid-2003, it was already quite a stable thing, having gone through a whole bunch of change before that. I was obviously in RuneScape Classic, and the wilderness was an incredibly scary experience for me. My first very strong memory of the wilderness was going out until about level 14 and finding the Dark Warriors Fortress, and I saw this row of runes. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah, I think I read your comment yesterday in the Facebook group.
Yeah. So I was just spam collecting these chaos runes, and for a level 20 something character, this was a lot of money for me. So I got PK'd straight away after I had, I think, 10 or 15 runes in my inventory, and I went straight back, and then I got PK'd again, and it was so frustrating. And I actually had a very negative reaction to the PvP thing. That was my very first encounter, and I could not believe that there were such evil people in the world, and I absolutely could not stand that PvP even existed in such a beautiful game like RuneScape, and I thought it was an abomination, and I set out to end PK'ing forever. And that's why I founded a clan called the PKs, which was there to patrol every single world and every single level of wilderness and make sure that no PKer could ever get away with their heinous crimes again. Just a decade later, I was one of the people partly responsible for bringing PKing back to the wilderness, which is quite ironic.
Right, so you were one of these so-called anti-PKing clans at the time.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think it's important to maybe clarify this to the reader. So back in the day,
you had PKers, but you also had anti-PKers, and these weren't skillers, but they were just like also, well, I don't know if I can call them PKers, but they were trying to protect um, other people from PKers in the wilderness. Um, so I always thought that was quite interesting because I thought that PKing was just about well, at the very start, I thought that it was just about, rushing in with your best weapons and trying to uh, kill as many people as possible and collect as much treasure as possible. And it never really crossed my mind that people might just try to defend the weaker people in the wilderness until I actually decided to do some more research about it, and then I found out there were actual clans just for that. So who would you say were the biggest anti-PKing clans at the time?
Well, as you say, it was a much more feudal system than I even knew at the time when I started my clan. I thought I was onto something new, but in fact there had been clans doing this long before me, the biggest of which was, of course, the Sabres. And
Right.
what's incredible about them is that they weren't just the biggest anti-PKing clan of the day, they were also the first clan ever. I think one of the first 10 players to sign up to RuneScape
Hmm.
was King Saber, who was a personal friend of Paul Gower. So it's a very long, rich relationship. And I joined that heritage without even knowing I had. And only after a few months of kind of discovering the landscape of the clan world at that time did I realize how political it already was. It was very, very sophisticated, even in its early days. The problem with calling anti-PK clans anti-PK is that as soon as they kill a PKer, they
Right.
themselves become PKers, right?
Right.
So
Right.
the Sabres preferred to call themselves anti-RPKers, R standing for random, because they were killing
Hmm.
with direction and purpose, but they were doing it towards this moral high ground that they had set. At the time, and if I could travel back in time, I would still take the anti-RPKing stance because in RuneScape Classic, the PKs were so dominant in the balance of the wilderness that skillers and other, you know, activities, they didn't really stand much of a chance. It was kind of swayed too far in their favor. And then over the course of my RuneScape career, however many years that was, we saw completely the opposite happen where the PKs lost their power. So I ended up fighting in favor of PKs gaining more power and control over the wilderness as it developed. But the story of PKing and PvP in general has been basically a reduction and contraction of power across the many years, from supremacy to almost oblivion.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So then, were you also in any alliances, or did you form alliances later? Because that was also a thing that I was surprised to learn about. That alliances were quite a big thing for most of the big clans. I think I remember the Golden Alliance, which I don't even know when exactly it came anymore. But well, alliances in general, it's something that kind of surprised me, and um, I guess it confirms the more political aspect that you just talked about. It was important to be friends with the right people, with the right clans. So how was that for the Wilderness Guardians?
Yeah, I always thought that PKing was quite brutal and it wasn't thought out. It was just about getting that instant satisfaction of killing someone, but there was so much intricacy and, a lot of power play involved. And that's, I think, what really got me interested in PKing in the long run. It wasn't this brutal bloodbath that people just go straight to when they think about PKing. It was how I developed my social skills. The way that I
Mhm.
spoke to another clan leader would determine whether I got slaughtered in the wilderness that week or not. So alliances were incredibly important to the point where I think I overstepped my mark. When I was first recruiting for the Wilderness Guardians, the Sabres noticed my post and they said, you have the support of the Sabres. And I took that to mean, okay, we want an alliance with you. But that wasn't the case at all. They were just kind of giving us a little kudos. But I pursued it and I sought an alliance with them, but we were far too small and insignificant at the time to even register on their radar. So we were invited to instead join something called the Federation. Now, this was very popular at the time, where smaller clans of like 50 to 100 people, which for that day was quite small, would band together and form multi-clan alliances. So even if you'd never met a clan, it's kind of like being a member of the EU, you know. So whereas alliances further along, when clans had become more established, they usually would just exist between two clans. In the infancy of the wilderness, and these clans, especially in Classic, clans would conglomerate like that and form larger alliances, groups. And that, you know, everything revolved around it. If you wanted to make any kind of move or have any event, you would always just notify your allies and you'd be in it together. To the point where they almost blended into the same clan sometimes. There would be ideological differences. So the Federation, which was the one that we joined, was combined anti-RPKs and pure skilling clans. So if we were ever under threat, we couldn't count on the help of certain clans to back us up in numbers. So it was a mixed bags, but it did its job. It worked very well.
Right, so did you also cooperate with skilling clans then to maybe provide material like armor or food? Or was it just with other PK'ing clans? Because you did mention there were also skilling clans involved.
Yeah, so some skilling clans would help us in that way, but it wasn't something that I was particularly good at seeking out myself as a clan leader. I think I was so hot-headed that I was, you know, one of those people that kind of blamed the skilling clans for not standing up properly for themselves. So I wasn't particularly skilled at diplomacy. It's something that I had to learn over many years, and I feel like I squandered that alliance because I wasn't calm and collected enough, and you'll find that to be a recurring theme throughout my leadership of WG, that I was a little too outspoken at certain times. So the answer is yes and no. I certainly could have done a lot more of it, but I know that more skilled leaders than myself were able to utilize the best of the skilling clans, and the skilling clans in turn would benefit from their alliances with PK'ing clans.
All right, very interesting.
That fell out of popularity once we transitioned towards RuneScape 2. There was quite a huge separation of powers when that happened.
Yeah, so maybe let's talk a little bit about that now. So RuneScape 2 was launched in 2004, and of course there were many people that did not like it because it was such a big change from moving away from the 3-round system and implementing the combat triangle. So it changed the PvP landscape in many ways, such as the game mechanisms, but also the strategies that had to be used on the battlefield. So I'm first going to talk. So let's first talk about the Wilderness Guardians alone. So how did the Wilderness Guardians experience that transition?
So that change was probably the best thing that ever happened to my clan, because we went from being hunted completely and exterminated from the wilderness into being a really powerful force. Because even though there was complete multi-combat in the wilderness, it wasn't for melee. You know, you could only have 1 versus 1 in melee, and then you could support each other using ranged and magic, which at that time was very underpowered. I distinctly remember when other people were attacking me with ranged and magic in a fight. If I was fighting another clan, they'd be hitting 1s and 2s. It had a quite negligible impact. The main battle would still be between the two meleeers. And when we switched to that new system, all of a sudden, all of these weakling newbie meleeers who were wearing steel and mithril armor actually became quite decent, and we were able to overwhelm with sheer numbers, even though the quality of our PK'ing wasn't very good. So there was a massive morale boost, and we exploded in size. And for that reason, I think amongst all of them, that's why all of the old alliances with skilling clans and the smaller clans just fell apart, because our clan was just able to subsist on its own abilities. And we formed alliances with other larger clans as well. It was kind of like our move up the ladder, which is a real shame, because those other clans, they were beautiful clans, you know. But at the time, it was so competitive, we were thinking we just need to take the next step up the ladder and be a bit more cutthroat.
So it looks like Wilderness Guardians really did embrace the launch of RuneScape 2. But let's maybe talk about the other clans that didn't. And so what are some of the bigger clans at the time that ended up really suffering from the launch of RuneScape 2, and that really, well, pretty much stopped playing a big role in the PvP clan world, if you remember that, because it's a long time ago.
That is a long time ago, and I know that the Sabers kept hemorrhaging numbers, and they never were the same from RuneScape 2. They used to be the biggest clan in my particular alliance, and then they fell away when that happened. The clan was... They were on the rise. Sorry, this is a very tough one to answer. The Messiahs, by the time we'd come to RuneScape 2, they were already dead, but in RuneScape Classic, they were the be-all and end-all. I feel like all of the clans that were on my radar continued to just grow. There were a very small few that fell away. For example, the Sleeping Dragons. But you know what? That's not the right question for me, because I was part of the big uprise of PK'ing clans, and everyone around me seemed to be growing. You know, it was a golden age for us. So any clan that was starting to decline at that point I was not very established. Don't forget that the Wilderness Guardians were only about 4 months old when RuneScape 2 came out, so we didn't have the kind of network that we did in RuneScape 2.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about something else then, because something I've always wondered, as someone who was never involved in PvP clans, or actually clans at all at that time, how did clans, and let's say specifically PvP clans now, communicate with each other? So how did that happen? How did they agree to host wars and have those events, if I can call them events?
Yeah.
So how did this happen? What kind of technology were you using, or what websites were you using, or how did that go?
Do you remember MSN Messenger?
Yes. Okay.
This is actually quite hilarious. So back in those days, you know, like if you were invited into the special club, you would be given another clan leader's MSN, and they were very protective over these, and it got quite entertaining. I think I still have some chat logs of me, like, you know, talking about other clan leaders' mother's abilities in the bedroom, and like all of these stupid teenage chats that you would expect a 16-year-old to say. And I remember causing some real problems with the co-leader of Anarchy. I can't remember for the life of me what his name was, but we got into so much over MSN Messenger. We were like, you know, we were sending each other the most vile threats, but it was highly entertaining. If we didn't have access to each other over MSN Messenger, then we would send each other messages over the forums. Forums were, you know, around since the start of my clan at least. Envision free forums were the big thing back then. Every clan had Envision forums. Before that, it was Avid Gamers, I think, was the website where you would have your forums, and we would reach out in that way. There was one particularly bad instance because MSN Messenger was so unruly, and you couldn't really identify someone very easily by their name. I thought I was declaring war with one clan and speaking to another clan leader by mistake. And so what happened was I arranged the war with both leaders at the same time, not knowing I was talking to two different people, and we ended up in a three-way battle in deep wilderness. It was that chaotic, and my organizational skills quite poor at the time. So a lot of mistakes were made. Things have gotten easier, of course, ever since we got TeamSpeak in 2004, 2005. That made things much easier. But yeah, MSN Messenger was the way it worked, and it was great. I miss it very much.
Okay, now since you brought up TeamSpeak, you already had a little bit of a talk about it before we started the recording. So, well, every clan, I think, has its fair share of drama over the years. So how was that for you? And you know, you know where I'm headed with the reference to TeamSpeak.
Yeah. So this comes up every couple of months. I post on these RuneScape chats, and eventually someone will talk about the TeamSpeak rant, and I feel deep down that it's what I'm going to be remembered for as a clan leader. You know, that one really bad day that I had, and that's okay. I used to really hate that, but now I find it funny as well. The story around that was I was just having a terrible year. It was my final year of high school, and I was stressed from exams, and there was a whole bunch of personal stuff going on. I was going through a pretty terrible breakup at the time as well. And just to top it all off, some of my most senior war leaders were leading a PK trip out in the wilderness, and they basically betrayed half the clan, and they called another clan, and then they piled and killed my own. It was a massacre, and it was a mutiny. And obviously I was in Australia at the time, and they were in America, so they were asleep, and I didn't think, oh, maybe I should wait for them to wake up and speak to them in person. I thought in my teenage brain, oh, you know what, I'm going to take a recording of this and then send it to them. And that went as well as you can imagine. So that went viral, and as much as I'd like to say that that was a bad thing for the clan, it was so much publicity. We got so much recruitment out of it because people were curious, who is this psychotic leader? I want to know why anyone would join his clan. So they came onto the forums looking for drama. They found all of these posts of me being very, very quirky, and they were like, this guy's entertaining. I just want to, see what this guy is up to because he's absolutely crazy. And a couple of them ended up joining. So in the end, it kind of worked. The saying, all publicity is good publicity.
Right, so a lot of personal stress, but it did help the clan. So
I got trolled, as you can imagine. Yeah, I deserved it.
All right, so then, so one other thing I was wondering about, what were we talking about? All right, so websites, etc. So when I was doing my research for the trilogy PDF that I wrote, I always ended up on the Zybez forums, because there was a lot of information about PvP clans, and a lot of information that has never been deleted. It's always stayed publicly available on the forums dating back to 2006, 7, etc. So I've always wondered, how big was Zybez for the PvP community?
Zybez wasn't always big for the PvP community, but it became increasingly so. At the beginning of RS2 in 2004, there were competing websites. So Rune Village, Tippet, Zybez, which at the time was just called RuneScape Community, Sal's, and a couple of other forums were all in it together. And basically Zybez seemed to win because of sheer dumb luck, as well as the quality of its quest guides and the fact that maybe the moderators were a little bit less biased. Slash less involved, so the clans could get away with more drama, which in turn was more entertaining to read. So a thread would be less likely to get locked on RuneScape Community, Zybez at the time. So the more drama attracting clans would post there, and it seemed to over time take its place as the hub for all interclan relations. And they had great marketing. Every year they would release like a top list of the clans with the greatest war of the year, the greatest video of the year, and like every clan would be clamoring for attention on this, and it became the #1 place to recruit as well. So it became its own hub, and yeah, you lived and died by what people posted about you on Zybez. It was basically the face of your clan. So you had your own website, of course, and your own forums, but people wouldn't trust those because they were biased sources. Zybez was where everyone could diplomatically and democratically talk about everyone else's clans, and it could be quite brutal. Clans completely got shut down because they were laughed out of the clan world. I'm thinking of, for example, what's a good example? The Morriquendi were kind of seen as a bit of a joke clan towards the end, and they kind of suffered a loss in their recruitment as well. There was one, I just can't remember the name of it, one very large mass recruiting clan, worse than we were, because we were a mass recruiting clan as well. They were so just numbers heavy. They would get 200 people on their PK trips, but they were all terrible PKs that they'd just get slaughtered straight away. No, I'm sorry, I'm blanking there, but yeah, your reputation was life or death. So any member who posted on Zybez, if they posted something that might harm my clan at least, negatively, there would be repercussions privately. That might be as extreme as expulsion, or as mild as being excluded from the next event, or just even a private warning. Yeah, it was basically the United Nations of the PK'ing clan world.
All right. So maybe one other thing, I'm going to quickly switch to another topic. So something that I always thought was controversial, well, I'm sure it was controversial, was the release of the Wilderness Ditch in 2007. So I'm thinking this was a bigger problem for individual PKers than it was for PvP clans. Maybe, but how did you personally experience that? Let's start with that.
Well, I would love to know what you think. Why do you think it was such a negative experience for PKs in general?
Well, I think many PKers love the idea of, someone who accidentally enters the wilderness and then had no chance to defend themselves. So I think that was also the reason why the wilderness was released. So I liked it because I was so afraid of the wilderness. So I loved the Wilderness Ditch. I loved that there was something that could physically protect me if I wasn't paying attention for a few seconds. But I can imagine that many individual PKers just didn't like it. We were just waiting at the edge of the wilderness for someone to enter. But then again, I never really knew how big of a thing this was. Like, did PKers really do this? Just wait there and hope someone enters the wilderness?
Yes, is my answer. I feel like the Wilderness Ditch was introduced before they removed free trade.
Right, that's correct.
So a lot of people assume that, very correctly, that the removal of free trade and the nerfing of the wilderness was what caused a decline in PK'ing and PK'ing clans in general. And of course that's true. But I think the first signs of death came from the ditch, because that is the playground where people start becoming PKers. If you're going to become a PK, you don't go to level 40, you go to level 1. And you stand there with your cheapest armor because it's the safest place to be, and you're going there where people might accidentally wander in and you have a chance. Because once the ditch was introduced, everyone who crossed it had teleport runes, and you had no chance of being able to kill them. Whereas before, someone who was being a little bit careless, you might be able to kill because there was probably not the likelihood that they were carrying teleport runes. So creating that physical barrier was quite lethal to the budding PKers, and so the lack of new PKers was exacerbated by the removal of free trade in the wilderness later on, but that was probably the first step in the death of PK'ing. So I don't like it for that reason, and I can't back that up with any evidence. It's only a hunch, of course. But I feel like that was a very critical step in the wrong direction for PK'ing.
Right. And was it just individual PKers, or were also clans affected by it? I can't immediately imagine why, but maybe that would be the case. I don't know.
Not directly. As you can probably recall, there's no multi-combat in level 1 wilderness anywhere. Right. Is that right?
I think that's
maybe
right,
on the far side of Varrock. No, I think it is all single combat. I'm so rusty now.
I would have to look that up as well, because
okay. But, clans so seldom. Also, because when you're in a clan, there's a huge. Can you cut that bit where I don't know? That'd be much appreciated. For clans, there's such a huge fluctuation in the levels. So back in 2007, to have a combat requirement to enter the clan of 110 was quite normal for the higher level PK'ing clans. But that still meant that you could get anyone from between 110 to 126, which in level 1 basically nerfed a clan. So there was no point in a clan being that low. A clan was only effective when it was in deeper wilderness, regardless of whether there was multi-combat or not. But what happened was, if there was no one trying PKing for the first time because they were too scared to maybe just even stand in level 1 and get the confidence of a kill under their belt, they're not going to progress into joining a PKing clan. So recruitment would probably have slowed as a result of that later on. You know, there is a progression from being that person wearing mage robes and a staff in level 1 trying to snipe someone away to becoming, you know, like a full PKer. And a lot of the pro PKers who became famous for their YouTube videos and their streaming later started in clans. So there's a progression here in terms of the ability of the PKers. So I feel like, yeah, it was a very, very grave disservice to beginning PKers, and that filtered up through all levels of PKing.
Okay, that's a very interesting explanation. I must say, I hadn't thought about it in that way, but it makes a lot of sense the way you explain it. So do you have some? So now I wanted to talk about the events of December of 2007. So do you have some more time to talk about that, or do you need to go? Because you said you didn't have until.
I can spare a little bit of time.
Okay, awesome. So this is, well, if anyone knows anything about PvP history, then the removal of Wilderness PvP is probably the biggest thing, which happened in 2007. So just to give a little bit of background for people who might not know this. So something that Jagex was struggling with in 2006 and 2007 is a lot of credit card fraud was going on, and at some point they were threatened to by these credit card companies to get blacklisted if they didn't change something about that. And that was one of the reasons that Andrew at some point cited as the biggest factor. I don't remember where he cited it. I think it was in a RuneFest Q&A session. I can't remember. But Jagex did know what they were doing would have disastrous consequences for PvPing, but they just didn't really. I think they didn't really know what the best solution was, so they just went for something that was the easiest, and that's just removing the Wilderness PvP altogether. And now, of course, there was the release of Bounty Hunter and Clan Wars as a compensation, but that still didn't stop many clans from dying. So my first question to you about that is, so why did Clan Wars and Bounty Hunter fail to keep those PKers around?
Because it wasn't spontaneous. So a lot of the middle-sized and small clans and teams relied on scavenging players, skillers, and, you know, people who were there for resources and things. So the older Wilderness was very organic, where a player would go into, I don't know, train at the Greater Demons, or, you know, collect dragon hides, and then solo PKs and small teams would attack them, and then they in turn would attract the large clans, and then the entire clan political system was built on that chain. When you have only the top level and no ability to feed on the tiers below, then it just kind of corrodes from the inside out. So Jagex was trying to structure battles, but it was so forced that we couldn't quite adjust. The Wilderness Guardians did, but we went from having about 250-ish members to shy of 100, and we continued to hemorrhage across the years, where Bounty Hunter and Clan Wars were present, with no real substitute for the Wilderness.
Right. So obviously that wasn't the best thing that Jagex could have done. So what do you think Jagex should have done instead of? Well, let's assume they really had to remove, or well, I don't think they really had to disable Wilderness PvP. Well, that's an entire discussion on its own, maybe. But let's assume let's hypothetically assume that they had no choice but to remove Wilderness PvP. Then what else could they have done to maybe not have such disastrous consequences for PvP?
What's the name of that system with the 76K'ing?
I always just called it 76K'ing, so I don't know.
That's what I always did. Like there was a proper name for it as well. It's a shame on me for not knowing it, but I take Andrew Gower's stance. He himself said that his single greatest regret in his entire career was not replacing it immediately with that system and having that transitionary Clan Wars Bounty Hunter time where so much damage was done. I feel like if he had replaced it immediately with that,
How do you mean PvP worlds? Is that what you wanted to say with the term you were looking for, PvP worlds?
let me just see.
I know those were released in October of 2008, and I personally always thought if
That's right. Yeah, it's a PvP world. So he should have come out with
Right.
PvP worlds straight away.
That's
So,
what I always thought as well. That would have helped a lot at the time.
yeah, and I think that it would have still caused a lot of damage. But I think Jagex could have also done a better job explaining to the player base how they were forced into a corner, because there was all the goodwill in the world. You know, they were a well-loved company up until that point, and they had the trust of the players. Really, they did. You would always have some people whining and some protests in Falador over this and that, but at the essence of the relationship was trust. And I think that they didn't do enough to say, we are at risk of losing the game for everyone if we don't take drastic decisions. They did say that, but they said it over a very impersonal post. There was no videos, there was no player relations. They didn't recruit ambassadors from the community to kind of broadcast that message for them, things that they got very good at. So they learned the hard way how to communicate with the player base, and they've gotten better at it over the years, of course, but it was very painful to learn those over time. So I would say, A, introduce PvP worlds right away as a substitute, and B, get your marketing ready before it's released. And that's not going to mitigate everything, but it's going to reduce a lot of the damage. Fortunately, the PK'ing world was able to recover a lot, but we never quite got back to those days for other reasons.
Right. So, what are some of the biggest clans at the time that you remember dying as a direct consequence of just that update?
Damage Incorporated straight away comes to mind. Reign of Terror at the time, I think they closed. They're open again, of course. The Shadow Elves, RuneScape Dynasty, The Clan, Fear, a lot of country clans as well. Dragonwood, clans that I held very dear to my heart. Eternal Honor was another big one. Hundreds. I couldn't name them all, and every time I name one, I'm doing all the others a great disservice, because we're talking about players in the tens of thousands who quit immediately, and even more tens of thousands in the years following. So, I can only give you the tiniest sample of clans that closed, and again, no evidence for this, but my hunch is telling me that the fact that WG stayed alive puts us in probably that last 10 to 20% of clans that didn't close.
Right. So something that I always thought about, but I didn't really know if this was just me guessing. And so 2007 and 2006, so a lot of updates for skillers and for let's say people of the PVM community. With you had for example, just in 2007 alone, you had the Grand Exchange, very big for skilling because it completely changed the way people would try to fight their way to the top ranks in the high scores, and then of course the God Wars dungeon. And so I sometimes wonder if those updates had been prepared in anticipation of the removal of Wilderness PvP, and then in hopes that PKers would maybe switch to the skilling community or the PVM community. So there was something that's always been on my mind. I just don't really know if that was something that Jagex really had envisioned. And And so maybe they had hoped that all these people would go to one of those communities instead of just quit RuneScape altogether.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. I've never thought about it actually, but it is a provoking question. I have to wonder whether they were lining that all up in anticipation and planned it, or whether they were forced to go there and scramble to do it because what else can you do without PKing? I don't think I'm ever going to know the answer to that, and I don't think Jagex would be prepared to tell us the truth on that one.
Yeah, that's indeed very correct. That's well, I think you would need to have to ask Andrew Gower directly, and then he'd have to maybe at
The thing is,
RuneFest or
though, I think Andrew Gower is a very honest man, and he would tell us if we could pin him down. I feel like it was the latter, that Jagex, having lost the PKers, were investing so much in all of the other areas in the hopes that it would compensate. I don't think that they had it lined up that way. I think it was done out of necessity. I certainly remember I myself was trying to get my clan to do more community events. We did, a lot more of the bossing and community related events in the years that followed when PKing was in decline. So I would like to believe that Jagex were just doing the best with the hand that they were dealt.
yeah, exactly. That's yeah. I think I would agree with that. So how about we end the interview here and then we like pick it up at another time to talk about let's say the post-wilderness PvP era.
Okay, I think that is a really good place to leave it, though a
Indeed.
sad one.
Yeah, it's a very
this
sad
was
one.
this was PKing at its lowest, but I feel like
Yeah, it
I
makes
feel
sense.
like that leaves the cliffhanger. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to like, split it up right there. It's
Oh gosh, I feel so nostalgic all of a sudden, and I'm also very intrigued by the viewpoint that you from the outside bring to this, because I was so caught up in the moment and like living it. I didn't really get to see it from that step back like you have. So I also learned quite a bit from this discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you because it really well it it this really proved that also my knowledge about PvP and what I had known before was already a little bit far gone in my head.
Yeah. But
That was
everything that you guessed at was pretty much true. You already had a kind of intuition about what was going on. Like you already knew, like I think before you even asked me that, Zybez was, the make or break place to be.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked that question is because I was for my so I knew absolutely nothing about PvP history. And so when I wrote my PDF about RuneScape history, of course you have to write about PvP. There's no way to get around it. So that was so that chapter that I wrote was by far the most difficult chapter for me. And so I was trying to look for somewhat objective data on the internet to like not only try to describe the most popular clans, but also to sort of list them in terms of strength and who was the better clan, and so basically to end up with an overview of the top clans for each era. And so then I always ended up coming back to Zybez because they had these I think these yearly threads where people could just vote for that. So like who would you think was the who, so basically it asked like who, I don't know exactly what it asked, but it basically came down to list your top clans and then we'll see who comes out on top. So, and I thought it was very interesting. I don't know how accurate that was because I would imagine that some parts of the somewhat maybe, well, some groups in the PvP community might not have participated in that, and that if they had, maybe that would have influenced the outcome of the. So
Okay,
I
so
don't.
here's something I didn't get to touch on, but since you're still recording, you may want to insert this at that point in the discussion as well. But in 2006, all the way actually earlier, from basically 2005 all the way into early 2007, the whole clan world was ruled by an honor system. The honor system of, like some very common sense ones, like don't crash a planned war between two other clans. But then there were things like you can't turn on this particular prayer when you're fighting, or you can't run in this certain direction. And these were all honor codes that were set up by Damage Incorporated, which were the ultimate PK'ing clan for many, many years. And they kind of had this honor system to basically hold on to their power, because this was the most advantageous system for them. And because they had so much power, they ruled over it and protected it, and any clan that broke this honor code would pay diplomatic penalties. And the first clans to start misbehaving in this way were the no honor clans, like NH, which stood for no honor, and eventually that became Reign of Terror, who became the bad boys of the clan world because they didn't subscribe to this honor system. I feel like I still hate Reign of Terror so much though, because they took it too far. They made a point of not just breaking the small rules, but the big ones as well, you know, crashing wars, hacking forums, sending spies into clans to undermine trust and to leak information and personal information about clan members. So the honor system was a relic of Damage Incorporated's supremacy, but there were so many good things about that. The point I'm getting at is that Zybez was very hostile to the no honor clans like Reign of Terror. So you might have a skewed view of those clans because they were ostracized from that community.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah, so I had heard about no honor PKing before. I just didn't think to bring it up, but it makes a lot of sense to discuss that as well, because where there's good boys, there's bad boys.
Yeah.
So
yeah, some clans like Eternal Honor, you hear it in their name. They prided themselves on being the most honorable clan. The Wilderness Guardians tried as well. We didn't always get there, but the clan before Eternal Honor, called the Sacred Templars, was actually run by someone who later became a JMod. So they were as pure of heart as it can get. And yeah, so those were the clans that kind of had the largest presence, because, you know, that was a community that kind of tried to exclude those who didn't play by the Code of Honor. And it was never written down. You would just know what it was by experience.
awesome. Okay, so I think that's all we should talk about for today.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Oh gosh, I do. You've made me really miss the game now. So I'm gonna see how my clan's doing in the next few days and have a bit of a chat with them.
So that was part 1 of the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if there are any questions you'd like me to ask him in part 2, which will be recorded probably in late spring or early summer, and then you'll automatically also participate in the giveaway of my ebook trilogy. That's all for this video. Liking and subscribing always helps this channel, so I appreciate that very much. If you want more nostalgia and more history, check out my other videos, my ebook trilogy on my website, my social media pages, or join my Facebook group called RuneScape Memories, where you can share and discuss all your RuneScape memories. With more than 80k members by now, we are one of the biggest RuneScape communities on Facebook, so it's like drowning in an ocean of nostalgia. Again, thank you for watching and see you in my next video.